Hi friends, it's time to pause for peace with me, Pastor Jule. Welcome, I'm so glad you're joining me today. I have a true confession. This is being recorded early because by the time you listen to this podcast, I hopefully will have spent 4 days and 3 nights on a mountain by myself in New Mexico on a time of living just for a little bit like a hermit. It sounds a little crazy, I know. Was a little bit afraid to do this, so I'm hoping you'll see me next week. And I knew that it was something I had to do because life has been so full and so busy. And regardless of how hard I try, I never get enough time for solitude. I never get enough time for quiet. Short of leaving the country and being able to be away by myself, which I have had the opportunity to do, the amazing experience to be able to do in the last couple of years. But even when I did that, I was still so incredibly active. And so going up this mountain at the Lama Foundation, where I have never been before, going up this mountain in order to be in a very simple dwelling, and I mean simple dwelling. I'll let you know when I come back how I fared. There is no electricity. There is no running water. There's an outdoor outhouse, and I will need to be carrying things up on my back and carrying them back down. There is a wood-burning stove, but they really have asked that I refrain from burning the wood until it gets really, really cold up in the mountains later in the season of winter. So why in the world? Solitude, right? Why in the world? But can you imagine? This is what I'm imagining because I haven't yet been. But by the time you experience this podcast, I actually will hopefully be on my way down the mountain. But can you imagine a quiet so quiet that the sounds, the cacophony of nature overtake? Can you imagine a darkness so dark that every bit of the night sky is able to be seen? Can you imagine an isolation so alone that it's you and nature? That's it. It's you and God. That's it. It's you, yourself, and you, and that's it. You and only a time to be quiet and to be still and to walk in nature and to sleep and to lounge if I so desire, or to read a paper book because there won't be a way to be charging any devices. I even had to buy a battery-operated clock in order to go on this trip because I no longer own such a thing. There was a day in my life where I always had one, but I don't have such a thing because I rely upon a smartphone for seeing what time it is. I don't even wear a watch. And so how could I even keep time? And I actually toyed with the idea of not getting a clock and just allowing myself to go with nature. I know about the time that the sun rises and about the time that the sun sets, and just to live by the crossing of the sun across the beautiful expanse of sky of New Mexico. It's a grand adventure and I'm looking forward to it. And by the time you listen to this podcast, I hopefully will have made a successful descent down the mountain and an opportunity to go back into the city for just a day before I catch an airplane to come on back. Solitude. So I wonder what your relationship with solitude is. I wonder if you have ever had an experience where you have been totally alone. I wonder if you have ever had an experience where you have been without electricity, not because the electricity went out and you weren't able to get any devices working because of a storm, but true saying no for just a few days and a few nights to all of the modern conveniences. I have to admit, I have a little bit of this sense of like, oh, I'm going to have so much spaciousness. And yet I know that without the modern conveniences of a simple thing like a microwave or a stove or, something quick to heat up my tea, anything I want to consume, anything I want to eat or drink is going to take extra time. Going to the bathroom is going to take extra time because it will mean going to the outhouse and going about the procedures needed in the outhouse. Everything that I will be doing without electricity will take more time. But can you imagine an actual gift of such space to experience something like this, to live for just a few days out in nature? I've been assured really about the only critters I should come upon were not only the beautiful grandmother spider that is living at the corner of the door of the outhouse, but just some bears, but they're all friendly, I've been told. So I'll try my best to stay away from the friendly bears. Can you imagine an experience of such natural dwelling, if even just for a few minutes? I wonder if you've ever truly been about a time of solitude, because you're actually choosing to be in a time of solitude, not because you feel isolated and alone and you don't want to be isolated and alone, but because you want to go and be with yourself in a desert, no less, on the side of a mountain, because you want to listen for what will arise, because you want to spend lingering hours in opportunities for prayer and opportunities for reflection, in the quiet and stillness that can come when we put down our phones and put away our responsibilities for just a little bit and be able to take that beautiful Shabbat, that beautiful Sabbath rest. Sabbath is a command in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's the fourth command, actually, in what's known as the 10 Commandments. And it is a time when we are able to cease all of our doing, cease all of our activity, and to be able to dwell, to just take delight in being, to be defined by the status of being a beloved creature of the divine, instead of being defined by what we are able to produce, what we are able to consume, how we can stay a part of this consumptive entertainment culture that we live in each and every day. Sabbath is actually a form of resistance, says theologian Walter Brueggemann, biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann. Sabbath is a way that we refuse to participate, if even for a 24-hour period, or as I'm going off on this 4-day adventure, 3-night adventure. Sabbath is a way to refuse to participate in the definitions this eat us up culture is wanting to continue to perpetuate. In fact, in the language of Scripture, we would say it is the resistance to the empire's way of wanting us to live. Solitude, silence, quiet, stillness. These are all incredible ways to encounter God. And as the desert fathers and mothers knew, these are also ways to get in touch with those parts of ourselves that are getting in the way of us living who we really can be. When we go into solitude, when we go into silence, in fact, I've spoken of her recently. Teresa of Avila speaks of that is when all of the alligators will come forth and all of those little goblins and gremlins of our internal world will rise up. We have a story in the canonical scriptures of Jesus going into the wilderness, going into a 40-day experience in the wilderness, where he actually, it's classically called, is tempted, where he's actually tested in many ways. And there are those who read those stories and see that as what happens to any one of us when we take to the quiet. When we take to the quiet, that's the sure time that little doubt will come in. The little fear will come crawling in. That little overinflation of our ego will pop up. All of those things that can keep us from our path and keep us from who we really are. So it's going to be an adventure, folks, and I'll try to share a little bit of it next week. Next week, which is actually the fall equinox, and so make sure you're making plans to be a part of Hillwood Presbyterian Church USA's Forest Therapy Walk for the celebration of the fall equinox. We'll be guided at 2 p.m. on our property by Sarah Champion of Forest Walk With Me, and depending on the weather, we'll have a bonfire together, or we'll have some form of just enjoying some fruits of the earth after our forest therapy walk that afternoon. That'll be next Sunday, September 22nd. And I'll try to let you know on that Pause for Peace episode a little bit of what it's been like to have been in solitude, this kind of solitude I'm seeking at the Lama Foundation's Hermitage. But for you this week, I'm going to invite you to find a way to take a break, to do your own little Shabbat, to do your own little space for solitude and silence and stillness. And maybe that'll mean getting outside, going to take a walk at Percy or Edmund Warner Park, taking a walk around Radnor Lake, finding a trail out somewhere beyond the city. Maybe it'll be something where you just shut everything down at home and just lock the doors and just get yourself quiet and put down all the devices. You can even unplug all of the electronics around you and sit in silence. Maybe it'll be an opportunity to go outside and to gaze at the night sky. Might even be more fun if you can do that somewhere beyond the lights of the city, so that you can really see what you can see in the darkness. In fact, by the time you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure that the moon will be growing in its brightness. And so there may even be an opportunity to follow the path of the moon out in the dark night sky. The dark night sky. So I invite you to find a way in the week ahead to practice some form of solitude, some form of silence, some form of stillness. And that's our Pause for Peace this week. I hope that you have a great week. I hope that you will see me next week on Pause for Peace and say a little prayer for me as I'll be traveling over to New Mexico. Blessings and have a great week.